So in today's video, I'm going to be comparing the two against the Ogre Horde boxes for Heroquest, going from the 1990 original expansion to the new, just released against the Ogre Horde Quest Pak. Just taking a look at the differences between the two. It's probably going to be the most diverse comparison to date on any Heroquest stuff, because not only this is something that has to change when going across the pond from the old EU system to the more brutal US system, it's also got all the changes for advancing 30 years forward, such as, having plastic moulded furniture rather than card items and so on. But yeah, so let's just get into it. First up is just comparing the actual boxes themselves. Now, I don't have an original EU box to hand for the video. I've got a couple of images to substitute for that, but I've got the actual, obviously, Ogre Horde box here to compare. There's obviously the main differences where this is a nice, almost Kallax shaped box compared to the old style. It's a lot thicker material, it's a lot more sturdy. The other one's a bit more of a cardboard sleeve, in effect. But in the same way that the new Heroquest box emulated the art of the old box, this expansion has emulated the art of the old expansion. Although what is more done is just taken a section of the original art to use rather than do the whole box art, which makes more sense because it's a square box, not a rectangle like the old one was. Obviously, this is listed as a Quest Pak, which is something they started doing on all the US expansion boxes. The original wasn't listed as a Quest Pak. In fact, it wasn't listed as anything. But it did used to say the adventure continues, which kind of implies it was that, whereas on the sides here, nothing like that. We don't have any adventure continues anywhere. Obviously as well, the back's now completely different. I guess, well, for starters, there's a lot more included in the box because it's got the expansion updated. It's got all the extra bits like a new hero, and they've bumped up the quest book to be full size compared to the other sort of thing. The only thing is it's now 14+, although that matches the new base game of 14+, because the old base game was 10+, and so was the Ogre Horde expansion. So there are some bits that are completely new to this box that I'm not really going to do a deep dive into in this video. I'll save that for a future time. This is all a lot of stuff that's just been added to it. It's not really changes or mods to what the original expansion stood for. So we've got the new game mode, which is going to be the arena, the World's End Arena, which obviously has board, tokens, and a lot of rules for it. And we've also got a new hero, so we've got our Druid and the Wolf companion. As we've seen before, the Druids and the Wolf. And then obviously we've got all the cards to go with them. So onto the components. First thing I'll look at is the small tiles. The original box had an outdoors tile, but also came with 2 small tiles that were double-sided. Whereas this comes with 3 tiles that are double-sided. This tile matches the original tile with the sort of, combat floor and a bridge. These 2 tiles are actually both of that, but now they're double-sided with some extra areas on the back. But these areas are to go with the World's End tournament. So they're for like the new additions to the quests. Obviously as well, you'll notice it's a different size. But just like the base game changes between the editions, the borders are now bigger, the spaces are bigger, the minis take up more space. Stuff like that I'm not really going to consider. It's just the main changes like adding some extra double-sided spaces and so on. And just like in the main game, we're replacing all the card bits where we can with moulded. So the original stone doors you'd get have been replaced with some actual plastic stone doors. The original cardboard ogre throne has now been replaced with a nice moulded ogre throne. And we also get these double doors which open and close. I like that. And also these are just completely new additions and will feature in one quest that we know of. Well, one original quest anyway is what I mean. With the ogres as well, obviously we're getting all new sculpts, but originally all like your basic ogres were just all of the exact same pose. Like you can move them slightly to change the arms and the weapon, but otherwise they were the same. There's all these same pieces, whereas now you've actually got 2 different poses for your ogres. So you've got a couple of different sculpts you can mix in there. The next additional component is the ogre cards have become actual cards, not just listed on the back of the rulebook. Also you notice the ogre chieftain has now become the ogre commander, just a slight change there. In name only in effect. We also get cards and minis for new range versions of original monsters in the game. We did have these introduced in the Quest Pak, but they were always introduced in the text just as these monsters have ranged weapons. Now you've got actual figures for them, and you've got cards as well to reference. And the final sort of main component change is all the chaos spells we had originally have now become dread spells, but that's not the thing, that's the general thing. They used to be all on tokens when they introduced this expansion, and they've now gone to cards for the new version. So let's move on to the Ogres themselves, the main part of the expansion. I've already mentioned how we now get a commander rather than a chieftain. One thing to notice is that before, all the Ogres took up one space, whereas here the regular Ogres still took up one space, but now the three much like more important and better Ogres now have 2 spaces to take up. An interesting point related to that, in the original expansion, Ogres, nothing could pass for an Ogre, no good or evil monsters. So an Ogre could block a corridor completely, no one can move through them. However, in the new version, that doesn't exist anywhere in the rulebook. So previously, this guy could block a whole corridor, whereas this guy can be freely moved through by the other Ogres. Whether they decided to get rid of it or just oversight and just missed off that bit of text, I'm not sure. But just playing it as the rules written, he blocks no one. Useless. Now we'll have a look at the Ogre stats to see how they've changed. But the most important thing to see here is the body stat. Now they've all got fixed body points, before it was variable. So if you see how it worked, in the quest notes you had Ogre body point and you just had a single track for all the Ogres. And anytime you damaged any Ogre, you just have to mark off on the track. As you can see in, say, an example here. But it does mean if the Barbarian did 2 damage to an Ogre on one side of the board and Dwarf damaged an Ogre on the other side, so that Ogre could die. The Barbarian could damage the first Ogre 3 more times, it would still be alive. The Dwarf could hit another Ogre for 1 body point, it would die, and so on. So you could have, some Ogres could get up to like a dozen hit points before they go down, and others can go down in 1 hit. It also gave a level of difficulty because anytime you hit a skull, extra damage is wasted. So I could have done that on the first attack. On the second attack, I get 4 skulls, and it takes 1 body point and it dies, and it wastes all of that. Nice little meat shield effect, I guess, but it did make it quite tricky with the Ogres in the expansion. And if you flick through the quests, most Ogres only had an average of 3 or 4 body points. I think across the whole expansion quests, you'd have 2 with 5 body points and that's it. So just looking, we can see now, so Ogre Warriors now have a fixed 5 body points, but they've dropped a defend dice to make up for it. Our newly renamed commander has been fixed at 6 body points, but again has had to lose a defense dice to compensate. Our champion has also been fixed at 6 body points and lost a defense dice to compensate. I'm seeing a bit of a pattern here. Not anymore though, because the Ogre Lord not only keeps all his dice but gets a massive 10 body points. That's huge, that is tank. And the only thing to mention about any of the monsters is just the skeleton archers now exist, with obviously minis and cards to go with the orcs and goblins. I'm pretty certain there weren't any skeleton archers in the original, so that's a brand new monster type. But it just fits with all the others having ranged weapons. Now I just want to know, it's got what I think is a little bit of a confusing rule about it. Just saying, when Zargon places a monster, they may place a standard or a ranged monster of the same type. But this whole paragraph here makes it seem like Zargon gets to choose what type of monster he wants to play down. Which seems a bit confusing to me because you've got a lot of space in the book where it will actually show you ranged monsters in the quest already. So whether that means it's all suggestions and actually you can just opt to put ranged in normal monster positions and normal in ranged if you want. I'm not entirely certain. I think I'm getting quite a few questions during this comparison and they'll probably go in a section at the end and maybe I'll have to read an FAQ or 2. Moving on to the books for the quests and the rules. We start with all the introductory text. The older version seemed to focus more on what Morcar was doing and where he's going and how he links into this. The newer version kind of talks more about what the players are doing, so it's got only a little consideration as to what's happening behind the scenes of evil. There's also some ogre background as well, and that kind of just gets chopped up and mixed in with the rest of the introduction. Because again, you also get a message from Mentor as well. So just going through all the rules changes and rules additions. One of them is Ogre Mercenaries. So you can now hire yourself an Ogre in between adventures to be an extra mercenary for the heroes. Pretty sure he just acts like previous mercenaries we have, where you can use them to move around, open doors and combat. But this one you hire once and then you can hire him again between quests for half the price. I can't quite remember if you can get them for half price in the old one. The only way you could hire mercenaries before, in the original anyway, was in Wizards of Morcar, and I have to have a read up on that. Another new addition to the quests is you now get supply crates, and there'll be a couple of these that pop up, and if you search for treasure in the room with them, you're going to get 4 potions of healing that all restore a red dice worth of body points. I think this makes up for a rule that's gone now, which is originally when you're playing the series, at the start of the first quest, all characters got 5 healing potions that restore them to maximum body points. So we've gone from every character getting 5 that will heal them to full, to a couple of chests that will give everyone 4 potions that restore 1 dice of body points. Again, the US version is a bit more brutal, that's making it harder. Some other bits that are mentioned in the original but aren't mentioned in the new version, including, so when you play as a series, you're not allowed to visit the shop between quests. That's not stated anywhere in these rules. The wizard and elf can't change their spells between quests. That's not explicitly stated here either. And the last one is the wizard player should reshuffle the treasure pack between quests and add any cards that have been used. Whether the fact that it's stated here or not stated here might mean nothing different at all. I'll have to check the exact wording in the rule books of what you do. This suggests if you're playing the 2nd edition, which is similar to US, you'll get to shuffle the good treasure back in. But if you're actually playing the original 1989 edition, it's going to get harder because you're going to start shuffling all the bad stuff in. Anyway, moving on. Covered in the rules, large monsters, when they can attack on any of the 10 squares surrounding their base. Got some things about multi-phase enemies are added. I won't really cover them now because you only really find them in some of the first quests, which are new and involve the arena. It's generally just like a second wind or a final form or something like that. There's also bone weapons, which I'll cover briefly, but they're just exactly the same as normal weapons, just have no value, so you can't buy or sell them. The animal ally we discussed earlier. The actual rules for that is if you're playing with less than 4 heroes, you can add in the ally to help you out. You might need it because of how difficult these quests are now. The section on mind points here now is also quite an important section and quite a drastic change between the two. You didn't really care about mind points originally. There was nothing you could do with that in the old EU edition. I think I used to always have the barbarian just given the talent of law because he had the lowest mind, and it did nothing except for perhaps discourage my fellow heroes from casting a sleep spell on me, because that's back when it was a bit competitive with each other. Anyway, now it deals with it. But it used to be, if your mind went to 0, your characters were unconscious, and that's it, they're just completely out of the quest. Same with any monsters, but anyone who reaches 0 mind is out of the quest. It doesn't mention anything about not affecting undead, that's quite obvious, but possibly there's no way to affect the undead in this version. The new version does state that, but there's a lot more new thing that you can do on mind points. Anyway, now, if a creature gets to 0 mind points, they're not unconscious, instead they just go into shock. All that means is they move with 1 dice, they roll 1 die for attack and 2 defense dice, and you can't give them any bonuses. So armor, weapons, artifacts, nothing adds to it. There's a couple of certain spells and scrolls that might help, but otherwise they're just at those basic dice until they can recover some mind points. So these last 2 rules I think are very important. One of them is player safeguards, and it's if heroes are trapped in a room with no exit, you can finish the quest and then somehow consider allowing the heroes to find an escape rather than force them to be stuck. That has to be had, because in the original game there's probably only one certain occasion where the players would ever actually be able to become trapped, and that's if the Morkar's Argon did a bit of a D move with the Witch Lord. Otherwise they could never actually become properly trapped. This game, however, oh trust me, just wait for it. But you know, if a hero does become trapped, it does also say now just replace them with a faithful animal ally. So they've got alternatives and ways around it. However, here we go. Unthreatened movement. If there's no monsters active on the board, heroes can move unimpeded. So instead of rolling for movement, you just treat as if any red dice you roll cancels a 4. So at the start of the game, if there's no one around, all your heroes can just move 8 until there's monsters. So now they've adopted a rule that was introduced in Advanced Heroquest, actually, where it was one of the better rules where your characters can just move a set squares. So there's none of this rolling, oh, the dwarf rolled a 12 and ran away, and the barbarian's rolled a 2 5 turns in a row and still hasn't caught him up. Very useful, massively improves the game. And I'm not sure exactly when it was introduced, but if it wasn't in the base game, I don't remember seeing it, it's going to be reverse engineered into it. Now if we move on to the quests, obviously the original had 7 quests, the new has 10, and the first 3 are just brand new additions. I'm not going to go through them because they're not changes. And they're more related to the World's End tournament, which I said I'll just cover a different time. Right, I swapped the books over just to make it easier. So anyway, the first quest, going off the quest numbers according to the original book, not the new one. So even though that says quest 4, this is quest 1. So we've gone from searching for the Ogre Fortress to infiltrating the Fortress of Ogres, because story-wise, in the tournament there, we got told where the fortress was. We don't have to find it. Obviously there we were searching for it. So overall in the quest, they've just removed 1 pit trap in this corridor over here, and 2 zombies in that room have been changed to 2 skeleton archers. But generally it's the same. Room A used to trap the gargoyle's hit points. It doesn't need to anymore because the gargoyle has hit points. So instead they've just added some treasure. There's a nice little treasure chest there with 1 crossbow, 2 potions of healing and 200 gold coins. In room B down in the bottom left, The room's been moved around actually, so the chest is now closer to the secret door of the skeletons. Used to be a bit further away. I think that's because the chest is trapped with the swinging blade trap. So the whole point is now there's more likely you can have the heroes in line to damage them with it. And they've also taken away the black square because you can't find that trap. It's associated with the chest. It's not associated with the square. Final change, room C up here. They've now added 60 gold pieces and the first bone weapon with a bone longsword. So quest 2, and unknowingly why, they've changed it from the outer caves to beyond the gate. If you look up here in our top right room, we've now found our first supply crate. So that's the first time the heroes are going to be able to get the 4 potions of healing extra. In this left hand small room now as well, the falling block trap no longer falls in front of the door. It now falls in the middle of the room. Which obviously the exit's down here. That's the only way to get there. So that could have trapped all the players from reaching the exit. Although they have now added the trap rules. But played as it should be, the first player in there would be trapped in his own to get through all that, or he would have dived the wrong way and then you never could have got to the exit. So we did used to have a room B up there, and the text was just, you've got ranged orcs. Of course, now they're actually listed on the map as the ranged orcs. So instead, they've had to move room B over to the tomb there, which is now you can just find an extra 300 gold pieces in the tomb. The Wanderer Monsters as well, it used to be 2 Chaos Warriors, and it's now just been replaced with 1 Dread Warrior. And you'll be interested to note, there's 2 zombies in room A. Why? Because someone put a table over the trapdoor so they couldn't get out. So what do? Would they move the table? No. They spent 30 years just to move the secret door to a new place instead. That seemed much easier than just moving the table out of the way. So we get to the third quest, the Lair of the Ogre Horde. And this one was actually allowed to keep its quest name for once. In room C over here, we've got Tograk. Used to be an Ogre Chieftain, he's now an Ogre Commander. Used to have his own little body put tracker of 4. He's now gone up to 6 as his standard for the Commander. And down here in room D, CS for Chaos Sorcerer becomes an actual picture. It's Nexrel. He's exactly the same, although he's now been given a little chest where he can hold all his stuff, which is 2 potions of healing at 150 gold coins. So quest 4, and we're back to not being allowed to keep quest names again. So the original Carrion Halls has now become Tumultuous Halls. The new version's got some extra text added for this quest, and I think it's mainly to do with the fact that Zargon's plan wasn't revealed in the book like Morkar's was in the original, so they've just added a bit of text about how he wants to keep an eye out for Zargon's vile influences. Again, you're going to find 2 of the zombies have been swapped for skeleton archers automatically. Chest B here used to have some old bones in it. They've now been removed. I'm assuming it's because ogres have realised the value of bones and they took it away to make a longsword. And of course, we used to have some ranged goblins. C over there, they're not needed, so now C can be the weapons rack, which is going to give us 2 potions of healing and a seat of blood red chainmail. And I don't know if that's supposed to be chainmail coloured blood red or some bloody chainmail. Either way, chainmail's chainmail, I'm not too fussed. So back to not keeping the names. Pit of Chaos has now become Pit of Dread. That was obvious. Although they've now tried to shoehorn Dread in as much as they can into the text for some reason, just to prove a point. So if you look at the top, you'll see our second supply crate has been added into the first room the heroes can reach. And then we get in on our tomb up here. 2 of the skeletons have been upgraded to archers. However, the previous Guardian Gargoyle has been downgraded to just a measly goblin. Not certain why. Could be a mistake, but either way, he's much easier to get past. And in the bottom right section, one of the goblins has now been given a ranged weapon. I'm assuming that's to lure the heroes to the pit of darkness in the room, which seems a lot fairer than the old zombie by a treasure chest with a falling block trap, where again, it's one of these places you can trap the heroes forever. And of course, that's a fake chest, or it's just empty, there's nothing listed there. Now we get to the main bit in this quest, which is the massive room A in the middle, which is just going to prove the weakness of Dread over Chaos. Previously, the Chaos Pit would instantly turn a character to Morkar's side if he just walked into it. This new pit will instantly turn a character willingly walks into it to Zargon's side. If they're dominated and forced into it though, they've got a turn to walk out. If they remain in it, then that's there. So the loophole's gone now, where you used to just dominate a character, just walk them in there and go, you're mine forever now. Again, another bit of a D-hole Morkar Zargon move you used to be able to pull off. And of course, displaying the weakness again, you used to get 3 strong Chaos Warriors. You only get 2 Dread Warriors now. Obviously, weaklings, they just can't amass the same sort of force. And randomly, the Chaos Sorcerer here was called ZZ, not CS. Quest, Fortress of the Ogre Lord. Another quest that's allowed to keep its name. And so we're going to start with the original Gangster Legendary Orcs here. Obviously, they're ranged, they don't need the description anymore. So instead, we've just chucked that into a nearby room. Just giving you a nice bejeweled cat figurine. Hopefully you enjoy it. Room C down here used to have 3 chests with spear traps and 700 gold in each. What we've done is remove those cumbersome spear traps and just accounted on just 2 chests. So you've got 2100 gold coins between the 2. And then they've just added a nice little portable gas trap instead into one of the chests. What a nice space saving technique they've got there. So if we get to room D, firstly you've got one less ogre inside, probably because he's had this massive throne dropped on him, which they must have used the weapons rack to forge it, because that's gone too. And now here, this is the one case of where they've put the entry door in between two squares. They've probably done it thematically, so you've got to walk up to it, but there's no real text to explain it or anything. So now we've actually got a double door there in the quest, so it all makes sense. But they have still kept here, probably one of the most evil moves, secret door, falling block trap, nothing else. So imagine that you've just gone to all this effort, you've just done all these ogres, you're basically dying, you think, oh, secret door escape, go in there, get trapped, and you're trapped in that one square, and that's it, game over. Evil, evil I tell you. There's also now one less guard outside of the room too. He's gone wandering off somewhere, or possibly he's just been eaten and absorbed by the Ogre Lord, which is why he's got so many hit points. He's just doubled up by gobbling his guard. I think I did note, it's possible you can actually have all 4 light grey ogre monsters on the board at the same time. And I know generally you should replace monsters with a similar colour. So what would you do in this situation? Does that mean if the players are like smart enough and they open all these doors, they actually have to fight one less ogre? Possibly. Again, that's something I probably should have added to the later chapter of all the questions I've got. But I've just mentioned it now, so it will stay there. Oh, and almost forgot one final thing. There's your final supply crate in the quest. And now we're on to the final quest, number 7, Flight to the Surface. So, one thing here I noticed, in the intro text, it used to be able to tell you you're going to lead the Emperor's forces against the remnants of the Ogre Horde. I mean, you're not bothered about it anymore, now you just want to escape and get to the surface. Is it because in all the extra like lore and background they've told you that actually the ogres can work for you maybe, and that's why you don't have to defeat them all? Uncertain at the moment. Anyway, haha, the cheats. I said earlier they spent 30 years creating a new secret door rather than moving the table. It didn't, it just turns out they found one that just wasn't being used and they've just removed it completely and stuck it upstairs. Or downstairs in that case if we've gone back to the surface. How dare they? Anyway, that's fine. I'll just be satisfied with one more falling block trap to trap you for eternity in a room with a zombie and a fake chest again. These people, man. Oh, if it weren't for that rule, that I can see why that rule's in there now. Really got to hope by this point your spellcasters haven't wasted all their earth spells, I tell you. But anyway, yeah, that's it for all the quests. Obviously, there's now a new conclusion, which we didn't really have before. We just had to make your own stuff. But maybe that's why, because they've added that line about the Emperor's forces. They didn't have it before because now I've got a whole conclusion paragraph to deal with. So moving on to other stuff then, you'll notice you get most of the quests now say you cannot exit the quest until you've done whatever to complete it. I wonder how many quests before the heroes literally just ran out the exit door and just didn't bother to finish it. And the Morcar player just let them do it. Continue with all the little tidbits. The original Mind Blast spell has now become Mind Burst. I believe there's actually a Mind Blast spell in the US version of Chaos Spells, which is why they've had to change it. And you note in all the descriptions, all of them, the Chaos Sorcerer is now described as the attacker. I mean, I know they had to move Chaos, but they could have put Dread Sorcerer. But the fact they've put Attacker and Defender instead of that makes you think that possibly some other characters other than a Dread Sorcerer might be able to use these spells at some point, possibly. Or maybe if you're designing your own quests. And you'll notice they've changed the leaflet. Of course, no longer do we get the Heroquest Space Crusade Battle Masters one. Instead, we get this download, the Companion App one, even though the Companion App doesn't yet have the Ogre Horde in it. Opening your stone doorways, the procedure is still the same as before. You just roll a dice and you have to get 2 skulls. Before, they used to just go, right, if you're these heroes, you roll this many dice. Now they just go, oh, it's according to your original attack dice, which makes sense because you can get a very number of attack dice with the amount of heroes you've got these days. Just the thing I find interesting is they say, note, the wizard rolls 1 attack dice and therefore can not open a stone doorway. Just odd that it didn't choose to also mention the druid who rolls 1 attack dice in the text as well, because he's literally introduced in the expansion, so you know for a fact you've got 2 heroes who can't open the stone doorways. The swinging blade traps used to just say, oh, you can just find it by detecting a search for traps in the room or corridor with the black blade, and it's now gone room or corridor with the black blade and adjacent white blade symbols. Does that mean that this trap here is now undetectable? Because say you go in there through past the rock, you kill all of them, you search for traps, but you're only searching the black space, you're not searching the adjacent white ones because they're in a different room. Technically, that means you can't find it. Also, going back to the swinging blade trap rules, they've rearranged the sentence but basically said the same thing. Toolkits can attempt to disarm it by rolling their dice. Dwarves automatically do it. Dwarves automatically do it. Toolkits can do it by rolling a dice. Does that mean that actually this is an easier to disarm trap than before and the dwarf automatically succeeds? Or is that just they've accidentally just copy and pasted the text without reading over the fact that it's different to how the dwarf should disarm traps. I don't know, but it's nice to see they've actually added a proper room layout now compared to this big white blob that used to exist there. So then we get to the Pits of Darkness, and like before, they've now just explained it a bit. Previously, they just said, oh, if it's this armour, this armour, this armour, this armour, but now because we have so many more types of armour, they've gone, is it metal, non-metal, or plate? They've also updated the art. They've copied it before, but now you can see the dwarves holding a torch while they help them out, rather than just sat there rubbing the ogre's belly. And just as a general, I've already mentioned all about the chaos and dread, but now whenever it refers to heroes, it doesn't use he and him all the time. Makes sense because we can now actually have female heroes in the game, which actually referred to as heroes, because in the previous book they were called characters everywhere, now they're called heroes. So further questions I've got there for starters. Can 2 square monsters use a single square doorway? If so, do they have to go sideways and go through it? Do they just walk through it? The only info I can find freely available anyway is on the Into the Northlands online quest, where it does say the frozen horror can move down narrow corridors. So I'm assuming you just pick one square and then just move through the door like it's that square maybe, I don't know. And obviously a question I mentioned before. So if you've got to do like say a Wanderer monster or place a monster and you can't find the colour, you just play a similar monster the same colour, which against the ogres means grey. Which could come up more if you've got an ogre mercenary. There's plenty of quests where you can find more than 3 ogres. So what would you just have to do? Put out dread warriors and stuff instead? And I just wish I had a better way of telling which one's your mercenary and which ones are the regular ogres before they all get caught up in the melee. I've still got to look at the question, what other light grey, what other beige units have you got? There's definitely none in the base game anyway. So if the only expansion you've got is this in the base one, what do you do? Just have to place that normal ogres. What if there's no normal ogres? I guess you'd stick a gargoyle out. This isn't a new question, it's one I've always had, but Festral's got 3 tokens or 3 cards for his spells. Does that mean he can only mind lock a character for a maximum of 3 turns? I think there's still a question that would apply to the original quest book, so the answer's probably online if I try and find an FAQ. Or just go on Board Game Geek and read it. And there was just a question for the older one, because I never got to that point. But just considering, in this quest, there's 10 ogres on the board alone, plus you get ogre warriors, wandering monsters. There's only a maximum of 10. So does that just mean every ogre past the 10th just has 1 body point only? Or do you restart the trackle? I don't know. As I said, I've never come to that point before, so I never had to worry about it. There we go, that's it. I'm looking forward to integrating this with the rest of the games, plus giving the arena mode a go. Funny enough, in the old Dungeons & Dragons Fantasy Adventure game, I actually did a custom thing when I was young and used to play it, where I just set up my own arena mode between all the characters. And they got a kind of similar thing here, except this is more like a classic arena deathmatch, gladiator style combat, and mine was like an arena style first person shooter deathmatch. So anyway, as normal, there's going to be more videos to come, and there'll be links popping up, either following the game, following the series. You know, there's quite a bit more to come, I imagine, like to do with the arena mode, Druid, any FAQs and questions I can answer. And just there's still more expansions and more comparisons to do. But yeah, so thanks for watching and hope to catch you soon.